Welcome to the 2025 Starker Lecture Series. I'm Mark Swanson, Interim Director of the OSU Research Forest System and the chair of this year's Starker Lecture Committee. Thank you all for being here this afternoon, both those present here in the room as well as those joining us online. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Native people of our region and their deep connection to this land. Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Umpinefu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are a part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. And I think it's incumbent upon us, if we wish to restore land and water resources in any meaningful way, to learn about and embrace traditional ecological knowledge and the deep connection of these people to the land. So again, welcome to the Starker Lecture Series. The Starker Lectures were established in 1985 by the Starker family to commemorate the lives and professional contributions of Thurman James, or TJ Starker, and his son Bruce Starker. These visionary men were both graduates of forestry programs at this institution. Indeed, TJ was in the first graduating class of forestry students and went on to become one of the early professors of forestry in the College of Forestry here at OSU. He lived what he taught, and he began purchasing cutover forest lands around Corvallis, and with time, these lands and many more became the nearly 100,000 acres of Starker Forest, which is a family forestry enterprise that represents some of the very best private forestry in our country today. We are grateful for the support of Starker Forests and their staff. This year, we celebrate the 40th year of the series. Starker lecturers have challenged our thinking about a wide range of topics from local to global scales. Many lectures given under this banner have been controversial, generating intense dialogue about forestry and land stewardship. All have been stimulating and thought-provoking, exactly as universities' distinguished lecturers ought to be. The 2025 Starker Lecture Series brings together top experts to explore water-related challenges that we face across Western North America. These talks will explore the fascinating and interwoven roles of forestry, fire ecology and management, geology, soils, and sociology. It is our hope that this series will provide inspiration for future conservation and research efforts. And as a reminder, today's lecture will be followed this spring by two others. On March 12th, we will have Dr. Paul Hesberg and Dr. Gordy Reeves, both retired scientists from the Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station, discussing the dynamic aquatic landscape, suggesting that new approaches and perspectives are needed in the management of both terrestrial and aquatic resources. And on April 9th, Mr. Daniel Bowker of the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative will discuss collective action and resilience, relating powerful lessons from a fire-prone region and the affected communities there. I would like to thank the Starker Lecture Series Steering Committee. These wonderful individuals deserve great credit for their efforts and creativity in bringing an engaging series to the college and to the public. They are Jessica Fontaine of the College of Forestry. Thank you, Jessica. Anna Starker-May of Starker Forests, Julie Woodward of the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, Laurel Sherman, Assistant Professor of Practice of Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and Annette Patton, Assistant Professor of Extension. And on that note, Dr. Patton, an ex officio member of the committee this year, will now introduce today's excellent speakers. Please help me to welcome her and our speakers. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm very grateful to be introducing our speakers today, Ron Heintz and Lindsey Pierce. I have had the great pleasure of working with these two folks quite closely for the last several years, including in my prior role at the Sitka Sound Science Center. And through Ron and Lindsey's collaborations that you'll hear about today, they have exemplified boundary-spanning science and engagement, and exemplified building bridges between individuals, agencies, and governments in order to solve really critical scientific problems. The approach that they're going to talk about today is going to draw on a variety of interdisciplinary perspectives, which I think you'll appreciate as I detail some of their professional highlights. Lindsey received her bachelor's degree in anthropology from Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado in 2010, before pursuing a career in retail and management. I learned just last night that one of Lindsey's jobs ended up ending because she was not willing to wear high heels. And instead, in 2017, she started working for Tlingit and Haida Indian tribes of Alaska as their environmental coordinator, where she got to bring her people-first perspective into a new lens and really think about helping establish and supporting resilient communities through sustainable resource use and really creative adaptation strategies. Lindsey wears a lot of hats at Tlingit and Haida. She's coordinating people, resources, greenhouses, research projects. And I think you'll see when she and Ron are talking today, how that really broad perspective and really community-focused thought comes through in the work that she does. Ron Heintz received his bachelor's in ethology, ecology, and evolution from the University of Illinois. In 1984, before he promptly moved to Juneau, Alaska, temporarily at first. But like many stories, Ron's temporary move quickly became very permanent as he began a career with the NOAA Fisheries Service. Like many Alaskans, he moved to Juneau and then never left, but Ron really exemplified that Alaskan spirit by really diving deep into the spirit of self-reliance and community service. He built his own house. He served as a volunteer firefighter for several years. And recently he was very actively engaged in volunteer efforts to help citizens, residents on the Mendenhall River recover from some of the recent flooding that you may have heard about in the news. Meanwhile, throughout all of this and during his career at the NOAA Fisheries Service, where he was studying toxicology and bioenergetics, he also was simultaneously pursuing degrees, both his master's and his PhD at the University of Alaska Southeast, and eventually got his PhD in fisheries science in 2010. He, and I quote, learned a lot of things by setting fish on fire to better understand their caloric value under different environmental conditions. In 2019, Ron joined the Sitka Sound Science Center, which is a small nonprofit, as the research director, and later as the senior scientist, where he now manages a diverse portfolio of research projects related to both terrestrial and marine systems in Southeast Alaska. As you'll discover during their talk, these backgrounds, which are very broad and all-encompassing, have truly helped Ron, Lindsey, and all of their collaborators really appreciate the value of diverse perspectives in pursuing both interdisciplinary and government-spanning research projects. So thank you, Ron and Lindsey, for joining us today. We look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you, Annette. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsey Pierce. My Tlingit name is Conflex. I am Chickenady Eagle. I actually grew up in Seattle, but my mom was born in Sitka, and we just moved to Juneau in 2014. So I've only been there about 10 years. But I've been with the tribe going on 8 years. Let's see, I think it was... What button do I hit to move it forward?
Arrow key, try the arrow keys.
I am. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I just want to talk to you guys really quick and kind of show you some pictures and do an introduction to Southeast Alaska and the Kutí project, and then Ron's going to talk some more. Here's a picture of Southeast Alaska, the Panhandle, and there are, Ron said there's 35 communities in Southeast. I know that TNH, we work with about 18 tribes. So I don't know if we work with all of the others, but this is an old map. It's probably a little dated because Southeast Alaska Tribal Toxins is now Southeast Alaska Tribal Ocean Research. It's a consortia that all the tribes together have put together, and they're creating a board instead of having it run by Sitka tribe. But Sitka tribe still houses the lab So I do various projects, and one of them is water quality, and we collect shellfish and send it to Sitka Tribe of Alaska for testing. Let's see, in the 6 communities that we work with for the Landslide project are Skagway, Chilkoot, and Chilkat should be like right under Skagway. Let's see. Craig, Kassan's on, oh, there it is. Organized Village of Kassan, Craig Tribal Association, Hoona Indian Association, and Yakata Indian Tribe. Some facts for you guys. I'll start with the state of Alaska. I get this asked a lot. It may seem silly, but we are a part of the United States. We are not a separate country. Alaska is twice the size of Texas. There's about 33,000 miles of coastline. We're home to over half the world's glaciers, and there are no reservations in Alaska like there are down here in the lower 48. Southeast Alaska has the largest temperate rainforest. There are 1,100 islands. Prince of Wales Island, where Craig and Kassan are on, is the 4th largest island in the US. We are home to some of the largest glaciers in the US, and we get more rain than snow. I had some Juneau facts in my notes, but I'm not seeing that. See if I can remember them. Help me out. Juneau is the capital. Yeah, but we'll move on. So here, I really just I'm not going to go deeper into these because Ron has them later in his talk. I just wanted to show you guys some pictures of landslides. In our work, we talk a lot about geohazards and landslides, and I threw up the definitions up there just in case you guys want to see them. There are debris flows, rock falls, and deep-seated landslides that we work with, and we also talk a lot about atmospheric rivers and how they influence the landslides. On your bottom right is a picture from the Juneau landslide in 1936. I think it killed 15 people. In the middle left is a picture from our visit this June on Prince of Wales Island. It's actually Ron in the red shirt right there. KK Prussian from the Forest Service. And I don't remember who's up ahead. But there's various landslides in Southeast Alaska, and they all have different characteristics. The way that the Kutí project started with TNH is in 2015, some of our staff went down to a climate change conference, and it was apparent to them that we needed a climate change adaptation plan. And so in 2017, Tlingit and Haida hired Kenneth Weitzel, who was our regional geoscience research specialist, and he started the adaptation plan. Took him a long time. In 2019, it was approved and adopted by the Tribe Executive Council. And even today, there's a template that folks can find online or have it emailed to them. But Kodiak, British Columbia, the UK, and Denmark have all started using our adaptation plan. What's in the adaptation plan? So in the adaptation plan, I think it's about 50 pages, but we talk about temperature changes, fossil fuel fingerprints, precipitation changes, isostatic adjustment, ocean acidification, forest habitat changes, invasive species. Okay, well, I was going to try and show it to you guys, but that's okay. So after the climate change adaptation plan was adopted and we started figuring what we can do next with the plan, talks with Sitka Sound Science Center started with Ron and our director, Raymond Paddock. I think they started with a COVID survey project, and then the Kutí project was written. Kutí is the Tlingit word for weather. It is a 5-year program that we are in year 4, funded through the National Science Foundation. And I already talked about the communities that we work with. That's one of my main jobs, is bringing everybody together. I've worked with the Southeast environmental tribal staff for the last 7 years, and I have become friends with a lot of them. So it's fun getting to bring our friends together sometimes. SLIP is the new acronym for the Interagency Landslide Working Group that we started last year. It is now the Southeast Alaska Landslide Information and Preparedness Partnership. We are hosting our 2nd annual in-person meeting next month in Sitka. Last year, we had about 50 at our inaugural meeting, and it was amazing. We had Forest Service, DGGS, we had tribes there, we had municipalities, we had firefighters there, anyone that you think or maybe may not think about that would help in the event of a landslide. Throughout this process, I have learned a lot. As she said, I was in retail before this. So I have really learned from our scientific friends the difference between Indigenous science and Western science, and all the monitoring and local observations. You don't really realize how important they are until you come together as a group and start talking to them. Anyways, that's the case for me. When we were able to go to Prince of Wales in last June, it was amazing. We went to 4 different communities, sat down with emergency services members from all communities and municipalities, and just the conversations we had, it brought together so many aspects people didn't think about. People found out that there were supplies in one part of the town and they didn't know there was supplies in another part of the town. So it was awesome seeing everything come together, and everybody's local observations. People don't realize how important those are, because the state of Alaska can't monitor all the landslides that happen. Prince of Wales has 200 a year, and it's not a very inhabited island, so it's not affected by, not a lot of people are affected. So I think that's why it doesn't get the attention that it should. I wanted to show you, still not working. That was supposed to be a video. So Huna, I talked about, showed you on the map. We were able to go there, and one of the things that came out of our trip there was, after bringing together the police chief, the fire chief, tribal entities, and just community members, it was found out that their emergency plan hadn't been updated since 1980. So that was nice. We had folks interested in wanting to get it going, so they're working on updating that. And the group in the picture here is part of our Kutí team. And on the left, you'll see Freddie and Janie. They were our Yakutat connectors. They have moved on, so we are, I think Melinda's online. She is our new connector for Yakutat. But you see Ron, Ryan, there's Annette and Di, and myself. It was a great trip. We went to Yakutat to see their concerns, and they're not like most of the other communities. They don't have tall mountains. It's more flat. So they're worried about lower landslides, and erosion is one of their more main concerns. Here, on the left is a map of Klukwan, well, the highway. You'll see on the bottom left, it says Wells, that's the Wells Bridge. And that's just like a mile away from the village. If you can see Klukwan, you can really see it, it's tiny. But you see the red circle, that's one of the fans, and Ron will talk more about that in his talk. On the right is Skagway. So they have a rock fall. You can see that light brown streak, and it impaled their cruise ship docks. So it disturbed cruise ship activity, which is one of their major sources of income for a little bit. And they were concerned about what could happen in the future too. This is our trip in June to Prince of Wales. In the top left, you'll see a group of kids. We were actually able to hook up with Alaska Youth Stewards and get to learn their concerns and worries about landslides in their island. Kids were from all over Southeast though, so it was fun to listen to. In the middle, there's a picture of a landslide on Prince of Wales that we got to see. And on the right was probably the best gathering, I think, on Prince of Wales. I had the most fun. Tina and William, the two elders on the left, were so happy to talk to us about what they've seen. They've lived on the island their whole lives, so they were able to share with us when they saw the logging happening and how they were able to see the repercussions of that with the landslides after the logging. And William shared a lot of stories with us. It was great. And then on the bottom right is just a picture. In Alaska, we don't get sun all the time, so when we get it, we take advantage. That was outside of the whale house in Kisan, which is a very special area. It was beautiful. This is just a list. I know you guys probably can't read it. Just a list of all the projects that have happened since the Kutí project has started. All of our collaborators have put their projects into this list. There's Ketchikan, Wrangell, Petersburg, Klukwan, Skagway. And this isn't the whole list. I couldn't fit it on here if I wanted you guys able to read anything. So I just wanted to share that with you so you guys could see how much work has actually come out of this and how much collaboration. It's pretty cool. And that's all I have. Ganesh Chish, thank you for having me here.
Thanks, Lindsay, for the introduction to the Kutí project. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm Ron Heintz. I'm the senior scientist at the Sitka Sound Science Center. This is our facility here in this picture. And we are a small nonprofit located in Sitka, Alaska. We have about 20 employees. And the mission of the Sitka Sound Science Center is to do science and bring education to communities in Southeast Alaska. And before I go any much further, I want to point out two other individuals that are really important to the work that we're doing here. The woman on the top is Ellen Newman, and she's our data manager. And the fellow below is Lucas Silva, and he is the project manager who took over the job that Annette had until just recently, about a year ago. So the landscape in Southeast Alaska is very steep and we get lots of rain. So for example, I think Juneau gets on the downtown Juneau gets on the order of about 90 inches of rain a year. I used to work on Southern Baranof Island. Southern Baranof Island is located in the southern tip here where my cursor is. And we used to get about 240 inches of rain a year there. So it's a very rainy place. The landscape is very steep. So that sets a stage for landslides. And there are lots of different landslides. You can talk to geologists. They'll go on and on about all the different kinds of landslides and rotational and translational and yada, yada. We're mostly worried about debris flows. Debris flows are very shallow landslides. You can think of them as mudslides. They occur when we get inordinate amounts of rain they come with rain. But landslides are an important feature of the ecosystem of Southeast Alaska. It's a way that carbon gets transported from high up on the hillsides down to tidewater. It's a way that gravel is replenished in salmon streams. And then this movement of large woody debris from the hillsides down to tidewater, which then is subsequently buried by all this mud and these debris flows, basically sequesters carbon. And then the new space on the hillsides that's opened up for new vegetation, all of that process works to basically make Southeast Alaska a carbon sink. So landslides are an important feature of the landscape, and we just need to learn to deal with them. And so in addition to causing fatalities in Southeast Alaska, they also cause a lot of other impacts on infrastructure. And when I say that landslides have caused fatalities, we've had 6 fatal landslides since 1936, and 4 of those have been in the last 10 years. But when they also cover roadsides, that there's, as Lindsey was pointing out, Southeast Alaska is about the size of Florida. And I think there are 35 total communities, 18 tribes. Is that what you said? Yeah. And so a lot of these communities have just like one road. And if you happen to be living on the end of the road that's cut off, that cuts you off from the grocery store or the doctor or the pharmacy, you might be out of luck, because sometimes it takes a long time for these roads to get recovered from landslides. There's also a typical problem in Southeast Alaska is there's no housing. Housing is really expensive. It's hard to find a place to live. And if your house gets wiped out by a landslide, you got to find a place to live. That's another problem. Or if a neighborhood has to be evacuated because of a landslide, the municipality's got to figure out where to house those people. And often they have to just put them in the school. And then Lindsey pointed out that the landslide, there was a rock slide in Skagway, and that had a significant impact on the local economy, because Skagway is a very small town, depends on tourism, and they had to cancel 30% of their cruise ship sailings in 1 year when this rockfall punched car-sized holes in their cruise ship dock. So this is why we started this Kutí project. So we started this project working with TNH, and we learned that there were 6 communities that wanted to work with us. And what we wanted to do was work directly with the communities and basically go into the communities, hear what their concerns were relative to extreme precipitation events, and then help them adapt to these extreme precipitation events and provide them with tools to help with adaptation. And so we brought in a team of scientists that we could then sort of cobble together some sort of solution to the issues they have. So some communities like Skagway needed to learn about rock falls. So we got a graduate student on the job, and he's mapping out rock falls or rockfall risk throughout the community. But in the community of Yakutat that Lindsey was talking about, it was a totally different problem. They're worried about landslide-induced tsunamis coming from up bay. They're located at the mouth of a big inlet. And there's lots of landslides in the inlet, and were there to be a really large one, which is really possible, they would not have any warning if a tsunami was coming to kind of wipe out their town. So they're very concerned about that. So that requires a different set of team of people that we have access to that we can bring into the community and work. So this Kutí project, as we're working, immediately raised 2 really important issues for us. And the first one was sustainability. NSF is great. They'll give you lots of money. You can go out and do stuff and stand up warning systems and stand up all kinds of cool stuff, put instruments out. But after 5 years, the project's over. And so who owns that instrument? Who owns the data? How this community is now dependent on this system that we've set up. How's that system going to continue operating in the future? Who's going to maintain it? So that's a big problem that we have to deal with and keep some people up at night thinking about it. The other thing is, as I pointed out, we've had all these fatal landslides in Southeast Alaska, and we're only working with 6 communities. And of those 6 communities, only 1 has experienced a fatal landslide. This is a regional problem. We have these 6 that we're working with, but all of the communities in Southeast Alaska have to deal with this issue. So we feel like we have this ethical responsibility to provide help to the entire region. So We are doing some regional work. One of our partners on the project is the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes at Scripps, UC San Diego. And what they've been doing is they've been improving the forecasts for atmospheric rivers. If you're unsure what an atmospheric river is, it's a type of storm that involves a very narrow band of moisture-laden water that comes out of the tropical and warmer latitudes and then makes landfall into North America. And as it hits North America, it deposits all of that water. So this is, you can see an example of an atmospheric river here in the upper left-hand corner. These storms can release a tremendous amount of water. And often they result in landslides in Southeast Alaska. So at the start of this project, they were pretty good at forecasting when an atmospheric river was going to come. But what they couldn't really do, what the Weather Service wasn't really able to do, was tell you if it was going to be a consequential atmospheric river. Was it likely to have impacts on communities in Southeast? And by the time this project is over, we're pretty confident we're going to have a pretty good ability to identify which atmospheric rivers are likely to have impacts on communities, because we now understand that directionality is really important. We understand wind speed is really important, and we're getting a better handle on how we can predict how much rain is going to come out of these storms. So the sustainability question, the way we're approaching sustainability is we've decided that the best way to do this is just to empower the communities so they can help themselves. And as you can see from this list, there's a lot of stuff you got to think about with landslides. I mean, you would think that you're just thinking about rocks coming down the hill and, that you'd be done. But no, there's all kinds of data that needs to be collected. There's research that needs to be done. If you're going to build forecast tools, you have to deal with the fact that most of these communities don't really have a lot of data to use to build a forecast tool. Then there's mitigation. Everybody in these communities, they're not too interested in the science. They just want to know how we can fix it. Right? So they want to know, how can we mitigate this? Well, you're not going to stop landslides in Southeast Alaska. We've already established it. It's not going to happen. So what we have to do is we have to think about communication and education. We have to think about how these communities can prepare themselves for landslides and how they can develop response plans. And that's a lot. For example, the community of Kasan has 75 people in it. So that's a lot for a community of 75 people to think about. So our approach is to build a community of practice. And what do I mean? What is a community of practice? Well, community of practice is a group of people or entities that have a common interest or common goal, and they come together and they bring their knowledge and skills to bear on this common interest or this common goal. So if you are a citizen that lives in the city of Craig in a really landslide prone area, and you've developed some sort of personal heuristics and, rules of thumb of when it's time to leave the house because you're worried about a landslide, that's really valuable information to share with the USGS, who actually employs scientists who are world experts on landslide initiation and runout. So we bring all these people together to share their skills and their knowledge. We started this process about a year ago, and we had this meeting that Lindsey talked about. It was called at that time we called it who knows what we called it. It was some very bureaucratic and boring name. So now we call it SLIP, the Southeast Alaska Landslide Information and Preparedness Partnership. And we invited all of the state and federal agencies that are engaged in landslide risk reduction in Southeast Alaska, the Weather Service, the Forest Service, the USGS, the Park Service, the Alaska Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys, the Alaska Department of Transportation, Alaska Emergency Management. And we invited all the municipalities, we invited all the tribes, we invited nonprofits like the Red Cross, we invited academics. And then there were actually a few citizens that just asked if they could come, and they were welcome too. And we sat down at this meeting and we decided, is this an important thing to do? Do we want to do this? And everybody agreed that that was a big deal. Then we came out with a mission statement. That was a big deal. and we decided to move forward. And so the way we moved forward is we developed a steering committee, and then we just started holding sort of monthly informational sessions. And now we're planning another meeting like this, and that's going to happen in a couple weeks. And that meeting, we've learned what we learned from the things we learned from the first meeting, we're going to respond to in this second meeting. So how, and the interest in this group is growing all of the time. It's amazing the response that we're getting. So initially, we talked to these people. We had about 40 or 50 people come to the first meeting, and these are the logos of some of the agencies and entities that are involved. And I've missed a lot of them. The support is really incredible. So how's this work? So here's our community of practice. So this big blue oval, this is the universe that we work in. These are all the people and entities that are interested in landslide risk reduction. Like I said, it could be the Red Cross, it could be the Salvation Army, it could be these people that have dogs and bring dogs to disasters to comfort people, all the way to USGS and the Division of Geological and Geophysical Services. So it's this whole community. And then we have a group that's in the middle that kind of drives this whole, keeps this group organized and keeps the process moving forward. And that there are three components to that. There's a leadership component, there's a communications component, and then there's an observer network. And I'll talk about each of those in a minute. Now, the leadership and the observer network are colored gray here because those are pretty much directed and run by TNH, the organization, the tribe that Lindsey works with. And then communications is sort of operated by the Sitka Sound Science Center. So the way the leadership works, I guess the other thing I want to point out is, remember, this is less than a year old, what we're doing. So we're really winging it here. And this is really an organic process. We're really kind of just putting it together as we go. But some things are starting to gel. And so we have a leadership process now. Up until about 4 months ago, it was Ellen Newman, our data manager, and I were just kind of doing this in our spare time. But we were able to put a director in place. And director is somebody from Southeast who's very well informed and understands all of this landslide issue. And she works with the steering committee. And together with the leader and the leader acts as the face of SLIP. And her job is also to try and find support for this organization so we can keep it going. And she and the steering committee work together to make decisions. So for example, right now what they're doing is they're planning the agenda for this upcoming meeting. And they're deciding who the speakers are going to be for that meeting. And they went out and hired a facilitator for the meeting. And as they're doing all this planning and stuff, it's all in response to what we've learned from the community of practice, what they're asking for. The communication function of this of SLIP, this community of practice, is probably the best developed part. And that part has been and that's because it grew really out of Kutí in a really organic way. And what we do, we have a variety of things that we're doing. One is these monthly information calls. These started with about 6 or 8 people on the telephone about probably last April and May. And by August, it had grown to about 30 people. And now we're getting about 50 people in each of these informational calls. And the way we organize these informational calls, a different entity runs the meeting every month. And they get to present what they want at the meeting and present whatever information they want at the meeting and do it themselves. And the leadership team kind of helps them organize the agenda, but basically different entities. And we have this scheduled out for the next 9 months. So all these entities are really engaged and want to participate. The types of things we talk about at the meetings was in October, we had the fire chief from Ketchikan who debriefed everybody attending on the fatal slide that occurred in Ketchikan in September. And he talked about what happened and what the impacts were in the community and how the response went. We have had the National Weather Service talk about their needs for weather station deployments, because there's lots of entities deploying weather stations now in Southeast Alaska, including the Kutí project. And so they've talked about that. Then the last meeting we had, where USGS came and they talked about mapping resources that are available to people in Southeast Alaska. So people that were attending the meeting, or that includes municipalities and tribes, were learning, oh, there's all kinds of LiDAR. There's LiDAR available for our village. And maybe they didn't know that, but they learned that at this informational center session. We're also aggregating scientific resources. So lots of people now in Southeast Alaska are building maps. Kutí is building maps. Municipalities are building maps. There's existing maps. Department of Geological and Geophysical Services just did a really nice report on the landslide in Heintz from 2020. And so we're trying to aggregate all this information and put the links to this information in one place. So if you are a citizen of Craig, or you work for the municipality in Craig and you want to learn more about landslides in Southeast Alaska, you will have a one-stop shop. You don't have to, be a geoscientist and realize, oh, this data set's out there, and oh, we can get these LiDAR layers from over here. We're going to provide you with those links. We're also visualizing data sets. And so this is, Ella put this together last year. This map here that you can see is Southeast Alaska has all these little dots. These are all environmental monitoring stations that are collecting data that's of interest to scientists involved in landslide risk reduction. So this is an interactive map. You can hover over the point and it'll tell you where that point is in space, give you the latitude and longitude. It'll tell you who owns the station. It'll tell you what kind of data they're collecting, what kind of sensors are there. They'll tell you where those data get stored, and they'll also tell you whether or not that sensor is actually functional at this point in time. And then over on the right-hand side of the map, you can see, since there's a bazillion points here, you can go ahead and filter those points. If you say you're just looking for temperature, or you're just looking for wind speed data, then you can just filter that and see where those points are. And then Lindsey showed you this other project that we just started, and that's building a database of landslide projects going on throughout the state of Alaska. So Southeast Alaska is not the only place where this issue exists. So there are, like I said, there are other organizations. And so in order to build collaborations, we first need to know who's doing what. Now, the third part I said was the observer network, and the observer network is the hardest and biggest lift that we have. And that's because what we want to do is we want to have engaged citizens in every community that's thinking about landslide risk and thinking about how to reduce landslide risk so that they can convey that information back to their community. And this is growing out. Like I said, this has all been a very organic process. It's all kind of growing as we move along here. And it's growing out of the Kutí project. And so when we first conceived of Kutí, we knew we were going to have all these scientists, and there's a bunch here at OSU, and there's one at the University of Oregon, and some at Scripps, and some in California. And we knew we didn't know anybody in these communities. So we had to have somebody embedded in these communities to help us get oriented to the towns. So they were there to help us organize workshops, identify, make sure we talk to the right people, make sure we could talk to elders, and just basically connect us with the community. So we called them community connectors. And we paid them a very small stipend, very small stipend. And these people that we got in contact with have all stepped up to the plate, and they've gone way above and beyond. And now we understand that these are local data stewards, that they can make it, they're the ones that are going to maintain the instruments that we put out in their communities. They're the ones that are observing and reporting landscape change in and around their communities. And these are the people that are actually liaising between the scientists in their tribal governments or their municipalities, and then relaying back to the scientists what their tribal governments and what their communities need. So this is a much bigger thing. And this is why we're trying to foster this network of what we're now calling landscape observers. So we're attempting to build an observer network out of the 6 community connectors we have right now. I actually have 8 people here because we also did this project in Sitka. So we have a legacy in Sitka and people we can talk to there. And then, of course, TNH is in Juneau. So we have people in Juneau as well. So we're trying to we're fostering this observer network by holding connector workshops. So the connectors just talk to each other. There's no, the people that are not tribal citizens are not really participating in these conversations. We're there to maybe kind of ask some prompting questions and get them to talk, but we're getting them to talk to each other. We're also submitting proposals to fund the next generation of observers. And by next generation of observers, I mean, we want to expand out to other communities, and we want to really improve the stipend that we're providing these people. We want to make this a bigger part of their job. And that's an issue in small communities. We couldn't just hire people full-time because you're not likely to find somebody who's available for full-time work. But if we could pay a half-time salary or a third-time salary, then we could guarantee that they would be spending a lot more time thinking about landslides, and they would stay more energized and more connected with each other. And then finally, as Lindsey alluded to earlier, we have an education program. Actually, OSU is participating in that pretty heavily, where we're working with Alaska Youth Stewards. So these are young people. These are young people who are going to be the tribal environmental professionals of the future in Southeast Alaska. And so we're working with them. We're teaching them about how you go about sensing information in the environment and what you do with that data. So this is the infrastructure that we've built for sustainability. We have this community of practice that we use to transfer information informs us about what we need to know and what we do know and how we can put those things together. We have a communication program for putting all that information together and making sure that the information flows back and forth the way it oughta. And then we have a leadership that is overseeing all of this and trying to keep the whole thing together and grow the support for it. But the most important part is this observer network. This is what's going to give the program strength going forward into the future. These conversations that these tribal professionals are going to have with each other, they're going to share knowledge. They're going to understand. They're the ones that can understand how the landscape is changing because they live on the landscape. And so as we strengthen this observer network, we're going to be strengthening this community of practice. And the last thing I want to point out is that the USGS has a national landslide risk reduction strategy, and they have a working group, a national working group, and we've been participating in those meetings. I think they're going to have their third meeting in about a week or two here. And one thing we've learned is we're the only organization like this in the country. So we have a lot to offer the rest of the country. And I'm just going to stop here. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Great, I can run the mic around. Yeah, Lindsey, if you want to come back up, we have our speakers. Let's go ahead and field some questions. I'm happy to run the mic over. All right. Dr. Katie Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and it gives us a different perspective when we hear about these landslides in Alaska. And so I really appreciate that you came down here to talk with us today. I was fascinated when you showed the slide of all the different environmental stations collecting data in that region. And my first question was, who actually gets the data and how do they do that? Is it mostly telemetried in? Is it bounced off a satellite? Does somebody physically take their boat out and their thumb drive and download it? I'm really curious about that process, if you can expound a bit.
The short answer is all of the above. So all of those stations, some of those stations are weather stations, and the weather stations may be operated by the FAA, so they're reporting real-time data. They might be weather stations maintained by the Marine Exchange. So the Marine Exchange is an entity that keeps track of weather in vessels all over the world. And they maintain shore-based weather stations, and those are reporting real time. Some of those are Forest Service stations, and some of them are research projects that the long-term research projects that the Forest Service are running. And those are harder to get at data. They're data that are collected and stored in databases somewhere by the Forest Service. The biggest landowner in Southeast Alaska is the Forest Service. It's the Tongass National Forest is about 80% of the land area in Southeast, something like that. And so they collect a lot of data, and then they retain that data. Weather data is really important for us, and weather data typically gets collected and then it's stored at the University of Utah in a database called MESO West, which is available to the public. So some of it's real time, some of it you have to wait to see it.
There's an online question. They want to know, have you developed certain environmental thresholds which trigger some type of warning, like rainfall thresholds or stream data?
Okay, I'll just briefly paraphrase the question. It had to do with, are there thresholds of environmental conditions like rainfall levels and so forth that might trigger a warning level? Did I get that right? Okay.
You know what? I'm going to have Annette answer that question because she wrote the paper on it.
Well, this is not expected, but working with this team, we have developed some initial first order rainfall-based thresholds for really geographically isolated areas. And I'm actually currently collaborating with folks at the U.S. Geological Survey to think more regionally as well. So lots of ongoing work. Happy to chat more if you want more details.
All right, other questions? I'm happy to run the mic around the room. Larelsha?
Thank you so much. So I work with rural communities as well, but not as geographically isolated as those that you're working with. And it's always a struggle to foster communication between them and between partners. I noticed you're using Substack, the QR code went there, and then you talked about phone calls. And so I'm kind of curious just what has worked best for you in engaging these really isolated communities.
Email works okay. Not everybody is on top of their email. Like I said, I've created friendships with a lot of the people that we work with. So sometimes it's Snapchat, sometimes it's Facebook. And in a lot of the communities, Facebook is actually one of the prime resources people use for alerts or news in the village. Yeah, I think Facebook is probably the top used outside of email and phone calls.
I'll also point out that one thing we've learned when we visit a community and we want people to come to a workshop and engage with us in conversation, nothing beats a raffle and a potluck.
All right, other questions?
Another online question, are there any plans to expand the project to other regions or issues beyond landslides?
Are there plans to expand the project to other regions and
Issues beyond landslides?
or issues beyond landslides?
Yes. We recently submitted a proposal to basically take our SLIP organization and start to expand it out, westward along the southern coast of Alaska. So we know that communities like Cordova and communities around Homer and Seldovia and Kodiak and out along the Aleutian chain all have these same sorts of issues that we're experiencing in the Southeast. They're not as organized as we are, but we know that there are some groups out there that have reached out to us and want information. So we're happy to work with them. One of the big issues in these out in this western area has to do with landslide-induced tsunamis, which overlaps with our work in Yakutat. And there's a group, an NSF-funded group called T-SLIP right in the Homer and Seldovia area that we're working with, and we're organizing a workshop to work together.
Other questions? E.J. Davis.
Thank you both for your presentation. I'm wondering if and how you've dealt with social conflict and controversy around the science. So for example, does anyone question why a landslide happens, or say, I'm prepared for a landslide, so it's not a hazard to me anymore, or have conflicts around why are these landslides happening, blaming it on logging or something like that? And if so, how you handle those kind of social conflicts? Thank you.
Well, by and large, people have been very receptive to us when we come to town and are really happy to work with us. But there is one place where conflict really arises, and whenever we have a meeting, it usually shows up within the first 5 or 10 minutes of our being there. And that's the issue of landslide hazard maps. Everybody wants to see if they live in a hazardous place. But once they know that they live in a hazardous place, they don't really want anybody else to know if they live in a hazardous place, because they don't want insurance companies to know. They don't want the municipality to know. They don't want to be zoned in any way that would reduce their property value. They don't want mortgage lenders to know, because they might, the property value might be decreased. And so this is a really important issue, because everybody wants to see the map, but nobody wants to see the map. So, so the way, and we don't really have a good solution for this. The municipality of Sitka and Juneau. Sitka had a fatal landslide in 2015. They went out, they developed some maps. They instituted some zoning changes in their community to limit development in hazardous areas. And then subsequently, by around 2016, I think that happened. And then by 2020, they had reversed all of that. Same thing happened in Juneau. Juneau had built some landslide hazard maps in the early 1980s. They got some money from FEMA in 2020 to build new maps, update those maps. They updated the maps. The Planning Commission submitted them to the City Council to accept those maps, and they had some ideas to limit development in some of the high hazard areas, which actually, if you've ever been to Juneau, all of downtown was a high hazard area. People didn't like that. The city not only did not accept the maps, they threw away the old maps. So this is a tough nut to crack. I don't know that we necessarily have a solution, but all of these maps all live in the internet. They're all out there somewhere. So I think if SLIP just goes ahead and provides the links, people can go find the maps and they can go look for themselves. But municipalities don't necessarily need to accept them as an official thing and then react to them. So I think right now that's where we're at. But one of the things we want to discuss at our next SLIP meeting is how cities need to deal with this, because there's a lot of question of are there ways that cities can change zoning rules so that they can make the communities safer from landslides. But that's like city planning and stuff and policy stuff. And I can barely deal with geology. I mean, and so that's way above my pay grade right now.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for this incredible work. I mean, fabulous work that you're doing out in the community, especially with the youth stewards. This is, of course, such a young program to be talking about results, but what are the reactions that you're getting from, especially some of these students? Are they feeling more optimistic about the future? Are they wanting to go into fields and study this kind of thing professionally someday? what are their thoughts.
So because we're so new, we've only worked with the kids a few times, but our trip to POW last June, a lot of them were scared or nervous about what the future will bring. You know, these are like high school age kids. And, you know, they had stories of their own and they shared a lot with us. And so I think they're a little nervous, and I think that's the main response, is just learning where to go from there.
I have a quick question for that both of you might be able to shed some light on. So one thing I study is early succession. What happens following disturbances, fire, windstorm, et cetera. In this case, do these environments fill in with vegetation, animal life, et cetera, that has cultural or economic value or any other sort of value? How do people view the post-landslide environment over the long term?
I mean, we live in a rainforest, so it's like a jungle. And so once you expose a space, the normal successional process will take place. And you'll get a lot of berry bushes in there at first, so that may actually improve access to berry harvesting, which is really important in Southeast Alaska. It's interesting. We have a group of social scientists also working on this project, and they're very interested. And I haven't heard the results of their surveys yet, but they're very interested in understanding how different groups of people perceive risk. So, for example, the people that live in Klukwan, and Lindsey showed you a map before, but they live on a debris fan, right? They live on this. Oh, here's Klukwan right here. Yeah. Thanks, Becky. So this is Klukwan, or this is the Chilkat River Valley, but this is and this is where Klukwan is. There's a debris fan here. So this is a continual series of landslides over the last umpteen thousand years that has just been piling rock up there. And then this river just keeps washing the rock away. Well, that interaction between the landslides and the river makes for really great conditions for salmon to spawn late into the winter, which is why the community is there. And these people are very used to having landslides all around them. And they've at times they've had to move their village because they've come back from fish camp and their village is underneath a lot of ground. And so they're very interested, these social scientists that we're working with are very interested in, well, what is their perception of risk about landslides compared to, say, a scientist that lives in California. And so that's one thing we're pursuing, but I can't really report on any results right now.
I see a bit of an analogy with fire-created ecological values, from berry to game animals and so forth, and aesthetics and so forth. Good. Okay, other questions out there?
Thanks. My question's a little on the follow-up of that. As I was listening to this, I was also thinking about a book that I read a long time ago, and it's about Southern California. And it's a very similar story. It's the San Gabriel Mountains, but massive landslides. And the cities and municipalities would build these giant repositories to gather all that material as it came out of the mountains. And then they truck it down to the valley and they use it to build malls and all kinds of things with fill and down the valley. So it was like this, and it's in this book by John McPhee called Control of Nature. And if you haven't read that book, I would recommend it to anybody. But so there's kind of two ways of thinking. One is the control of nature way, that we're gonna make nature do what we want to fit into our construct. And the other one, I would say that is becoming more talked about, is working with nature instead. And so I'm kind of curious from an indigenous standpoint and having different ways of knowing, how do the indigenous populations feel about this Western science dichotomy between controlling nature and working with nature?
Well, I'll give you my perspective, and I'm an old white guy, so my perspective on that is first off, the communities have been they've been really accepting of us when we bring a bunch of scientists in the community. They're really eager to hear what we have to say. I'll also point out that as we talk with our connectors and we talk with members of these communities, and I'm thinking particularly of a person some people we've met on Prince of Wales, is they're extremely knowledgeable about landslides and landslide behavior, but it's all presented in this sort of Western science canon, right? So they're making these observations about where they live and what they see, but they're always expressed in the sense of the way our geoscientists would express it. That being said, when you go to Klukwan, what Klukwan did, what happened in Klukwan, the way that they have dealt with this sort of landslide issue, that's this chronic, and when I mean chronic, I mean like the last 12,000 years for these people, issue in their community was sometimes they've had to move their village. But as they've settled into this community in the 1980s, there was a berm. They built a berm up above the town to just divert the landslides away from town. So the landslides could just go where they wanted to go, just don't come into town. And that worked really well. They had the last landslide they had in town was around that time, but now we've seen that the area behind the berm is filled in. The landslides are occasionally beginning to avulse over the berm and come towards town again. Luckily, there hasn't been a big one that's made it all the way to the town. But the community is working with the Department of Transportation to clean up the berm and put that back in place. So there are ways that we can work with nature. That's an example. Another way is in Sitka, where we built this landslide forecasting tool to forecast the risk of a landslide at any given point in time. People can make their own decisions, but at least they know that the risk is low. Statistically, the risk is low, or statistically, the risk is medium or high, but they can at least make their own decisions about how to deal with that. So, I mean, that's kind of what we're faced with in Southeast Alaska. We don't have the economic resources to do like what they're doing in Switzerland or anything like that. So we're going to have to work with nature in Southeast.
No, great. All right.